Hi, welcome to today's Insta Live, and today we are going to talk about surprising facts about fertility. And the reason why I wanted to bring this topic about surprising things about fertility is because fertility is something that people don't often talk about. And when we talk about, for example, when we are learning about how things work with our bodies when we are in school, we often are not told about fertility or how things actually are. So when we are faced with infertility, a lot of the times we are faced with a lot of information, especially these days with Google. There can be so much information. A lot of that information is not reliable. So how do we know what's true, what's real when we are navigating Google? And some of the things are actually true and they are actually very surprising. So today I'm going to talk to you about these very surprising facts about fertility. So I'm just going to put the title here on our conversation so that everyone who joins us can know from the start at any point of the conversation what we are talking about. So surprising facts about fertility. And we have Frank joining us. He's downstairs in the living room. Hi, Frank. So maybe today Frank will also learn about new things. And so I have 10 things to share with you in half an hour. Are you ready? So the first fact that I would like to share with you has to do with fertility rates. And maybe you've heard that fertility affects 1 in 6 people here in the UK. And if you think about it, you may be, for example, in your workplace, or you may be in commuting to work, and you think about it, 1 in 6 is not, it's actually a lot of people. You may be working with more than 6 people, so there is at least someone else there who is affected by fertility. So this is our first fertility fact, is that it affects 1 in 6. Sorry. If we look at developing countries, so countries who are not as advanced as we are, fertility rates are even worse. So they affect 1 in 4 people. Can you imagine? So this means that in these countries, when people don't have access to a good health, good nutrition, then their fertility is even more impaired. So that's a big problem. 1 in 6 in advanced economies, but it affects 1 in 4 in developing countries. Actually, the World Health Organization has declared infertility a major global problem. So this is something that we need to be mindful of. You're not alone. It affects so many people. The fact number 2 that I would like to tell you about has to do with cost. And as you know, fertility treatments are so expensive. And if we look at the UK, we know we have this postcode lottery going on, where even though we all belong to the National Health Service, depending on where you live right now will make a difference in terms of what kind of treatment you can have access to. Some places you can have access to 1 or 2 cycles. Some places you don't have access to any cycles. So that is an important fact to be aware of. Now, when we look at the cost of treatment in the UK privately, you can count with around £5,000 per cycle. And this is if you don't need any specific techniques on top of it, like ICSI, like egg or sperm donation. Now, if you look at Europe, for example, we are looking around £3,000 per cycle. If you look at Canada, it ranges between $7,000 and $13,000. But they have a mechanism where you can claim back 50% of these costs to the state, which is something quite unique that I haven't found anywhere else. And in the US, it costs around per cycle. So you can see that the treatment cost can change so much between Europe, UK, and America. It's so varied. And the changes in price are related mainly with the facilities, the technology that each of these clinics or countries will have. It's related with the regulations, so how much regulated are these clinics and the things that they need to do to be in line with those regulations. It has to do with the cost of drugs, because the cost of drugs in certain countries is way more than compared to other countries. And then it has to do with the search and demand. If you are in a place where there is only one clinic and lots of people looking for treatment, that clinic can actually increase the prices, and because people will not go elsewhere for it. But if there's lots of clinics, more competition, then the prices tend to go down a little bit. So this is one of the things that can change the price of fertility treatment. So we are on topic number 2. Surprising fact number 1 had to do with fertility rates. Fertility fact number 2 had to do with the cost of fertility and how different the cost can be from country to country. And fertility fact number 3 has to do with gametes. So here we're talking about the reproductive cells, egg and sperm. So women are actually born with between 1 and 2 million eggs. So when we are born babies, we already have between 1 and 2 million eggs inside us. And when we reach puberty, we will have around 200,000 eggs, okay? And then each month, one egg is released, but not all of these 2,000 eggs will be used, actually. So not all the eggs will grow and mature and be ready to be fertilized. Now, if we think about women that reaching puberty, we have around 200,000 eggs, and that seems a lot. Wait until I tell you about sperm. So men produce between 40 and 60 million sperm cells per milliliter. That's a huge amount, okay? And we think about that corresponds to anything between 80 and 300 million sperm per ejaculation. That's a lot, okay? So men produce more sperm than women actually produce eggs. And that's because the sperm will have to navigate through the female reproductive tract to reach the sperm, and not all the sperm will actually reach its destination. It has a lot of obstacles to overcome, and only the best sperm will get to the egg. And thinking about it, another interesting fact is that actually the sperm is the smallest cell in the human body. And the egg is actually the biggest cell in the human body. How interesting is that? And we were talking about the sperm. Men produce a lot of sperm compared to the woman who will only release one egg each month. The sperm needs to navigate its way all the way through the vagina, the uterus, and meet the egg in the fallopian tubes. And this journey that the sperm needs to go through is very challenging, has a lot of obstacles. Think of it like the tough mudder for sperm, okay? And historically, we used to believe that the strongest sperm and the quickest would fertilize the egg. But that's not completely true. So what happens is that some of the sperm will die along the way because they're not strong enough to reach the egg. But then once the egg has a few sperm to choose from, it's actually the egg that chooses the sperm and not the quickest sperm that ends up fertilizing the egg. So that means that the egg has a much more proactive role instead of just being there waiting to be fertilized. So it's a very much proactive role, and the egg ends up choosing the sperm based on its genetic qualities. So that's quite an interesting fact that maybe you weren't aware of. So we're now up to number 5, fact number 5, and that has to do with the fertile window. So a lot of people think that women can get pregnant any time of the month, and that's actually not true. Every woman can only get pregnant 5 days plus 1, so 6 days a month. And there's a biological explanation for this. Once you release your egg only survives for 24 hours. So if it's not fertilized, it will degenerate and die. And the sperm can survive inside you for 5 days. So the 5 days of sperm survival plus 1 day of egg survival, that's 6 days. So if you are ovulating today, if you had sex 5 days ago, you could still have sperm inside you that could potentially fertilize your egg. But the day after, so tomorrow, after ovulation, you will have no chance of fertilization. So that is quite interesting. And then there's lots of questions about when is the best time to conceive, and that's quite an interesting fact actually. So that's quite an interesting fact really. They found out that most women will ovulate in the evening, and they found out that most men have more improved quality and improved sperm motility also in late afternoon. So that means that evening, night is the best time to conceive. So they determined that anytime between 5 p.m. and before 7:30 a.m. is the best time for fertilizing the egg. And when we look at the overall year, they say it's March, April, and May apparently are the optimum time for conception, which is quite interesting. So now we're going to fact number 6, and this one has to do with gender. So how does the embryo end up being male or female? So that might be quite interesting, and maybe you don't know how it happens. Actually, all eggs have an X chromosome. So that means that all eggs are female. But the sperm can either have an X or an Y chromosome. So that means that it's actually the sperm that will decide if this embryo is a girl or a boy. So that's quite interesting, isn't it? Now moving to fact number 7. This has to do with fertility testing. So let's say that you've had your embryo transfer, you are now in the 2-week wait, and I know it's super difficult and you really want to test, okay? So the reason why you should not test before the 2-week wait is due is because you can have a false result. So what does this mean? So you can either have a false positive or a false negative. So if you are testing before the 2-week wait is due, you do a urine test and maybe it will not, you may be pregnant, but you haven't produced enough HCG hormone yet. So this is the hormone that those pregnancy tests will test. And this hormone is only developed, you only have it in your system once the embryo has implanted. Okay, and let's say it takes around 8 days for the hormone to be detected in your blood and around 10 days for the hormone to be detected in your urine. If you test early, you may actually be pregnant, but because you don't have enough amount of hormone in your urine to be detected by the test, you may have a false negative. So you're pregnant, but the test will say negative. And that can be very, of course, overwhelming, and it's not good for you. However, there is also another chance of having a false positive, which can be even more devastating. So here we're talking about a pregnancy test that will give you a positive pregnancy test when you're actually not pregnant. How is this possible? And I'm going to explain to you. So what happens is that when you do your trigger injection to ovulate, some of these trigger injections will have the hormone HCG. So if you are testing early, it may be that you still have some of this hormone from the trigger injection in your system. So you're getting a positive pregnancy test when you're actually not pregnant. So testing early is not a good thing. It can give you false negatives and false positives. Okay, so definitely wait for those 2 weeks to be finally over. And now I want to talk to you about fact number 8, and it has to do with sleep. I think sometimes we don't talk enough about sleep and the importance of sleep, how much it affects our whole body, and it does affect our fertility as well. So sleep and our sleep hormones that determine when we are awake or asleep, they're named melatonin and cortisol. They are regulated by the hypothalamus in the brain. So this same area of the brain that regulates our sleep and awake rhythms also regulates the release of our reproductive hormones. So if we're not getting enough sleep, our hormones may be impaired, you will not be ovulating properly, and then your fertility is affected. That's why sleep is so important. So there's lots of studies telling us how much sleep is enough for it not to affect our fertility and our hormones in general. So they say if we sleep between 7 and 8 hours, that's the best thing that we could do. Okay? Studies suggest between 7 and 8 hours of sleep every night, you are increasing your chances of getting pregnant by 25%. That's a huge amount. And this includes even if you are going through fertility treatment. They also noticed that if you are getting less than 7 hours a night, you are decreasing your chances of conception by 15%. So it's super important to have a good sleep routine, making sure you turn the lights off because light will trigger your awake hormones. So don't use your phones, close the windows. Make sure you have a good sleep routine as you are going to sleep, and make sure you have at least those 7 or 8 hours of sleep. Now we're going to fertility fact, surprising number 9 already. And here we're talking about emotional distress. I'm very passionate about this fact because even though fertility may be something physical, it affects your mental health as well. It has affected mine, and I think it will be a long-term effect. Even if we end up being parents, the consequences of the emotional distress we go through will be with us forever. And the fact that I want to talk about today is that emotional distress is the number one reason for patients to stop fertility treatment. It might be surprising because you might think, well, I thought it would be the cost of IVF or the access to treatment, but it's actually the emotional distress. There are a lot of countries, especially in the US, where patients already have treatment paid for through their insurance companies, and they still don't go ahead with treatment because of the emotional distress. So this is a very important fact. We also have seen through research that 90% of people going through infertility suffer with depression. 42% have suicidal thoughts. So I don't think we should underestimate the emotional distress that people go through. To push someone to the extent of having suicidal thoughts, that is pretty severe. And then if you've been through a miscarriage, 4 in 10 people who have been through a miscarriage end up having PTSD symptoms. So emotional support is key. It should be part of treatment. I will never get tired of saying this. It should be part of treatment. And then finally, we're going to fertility fact number 10. And here I would like to talk about fitness, because we usually talk about being healthy, and these days there's lots of people who are into fitness and doing a lot of gym and exercise, but too much exercise can be harmful for fertility. I'm not saying not to do anything. You do need to do some exercise. 30 minutes of moderate exercise each day is good, okay? However, extreme exercise can be harmful. If you are too fit, too lean, it can affect your ovulation and you will not get pregnant if you're not ovulating, okay? And then you might have seen recently in the news, if you're taking steroids, lots of men like taking steroids to have big muscles and stuff, that affects sperm quality, okay? So fitness is not always good. It's always a matter of moderation. So today we're talking about 10 fertility facts I've talked about, and I will make sure I will leave this video available after the 24 hours are due. But we've talked about surprising facts around fertility rates, the cost of treatment, gametes, conception, fertility window. We talked about gender, how is gender decided. We talked about pregnancy testing, sleep, emotional distress, and fitness. So 10 surprising facts. I hope they have helped you in some way today. And if you have any question, or if you have found other surprising facts, please do comment or text me, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again next week.